Hi, it's Michael Cooper. I'm with the Private to IPO Partnership Network, and we are taking a look at and listening to CEOs who are leading their companies from the private sphere to an exit strategy. These are companies that are top-notch, gold standard in their industries, and know what it takes to grow their company to a successful exit. Our next guest is an industry leader in the ophthalmology industry, and they have developed a very exciting new procedure and medical device in and around curing cataracts for clients. This is a worldwide problem, of course, and John Hendrick and Mynosys have developed the product, cleared CE regulatory hurdles in Europe, and are moving toward FDA regulatory hurdles in the US, which they believe will be cleared by the fourth quarter of 2016. Mynosys has initiated their procedures in over 20 live cataract and vision issues in El Salvador, outside the U.S. Market, and are moving toward a very small clinical study in the U.S. right now. We welcome John Hendrick and look forward to hearing about his exciting company and the market opportunity in this field. Good afternoon and welcome, John Hendrick, President of Mynosys. Mynosys has been creating a technology that will help my grandmother who has cataracts reduce the problem in record time while keeping costs down. And it has been written up by the American Academy of Ophthalmology in glowing terms, in terms of precision, accuracy, and speed. John, welcome, and can you tell us a little bit about where the technology came from, where you are in the application process, and where you hope to take the company?
Certainly. Well, I appreciate the opportunity to have a discussion with you all today. Mynosys was started by a couple of PhDs, MD. One was Dr. David Shredivan, who is the Director of Research for UCSF here in San Francisco. MD, PhD, and then he started to work with a gentleman by the name of Chris Keller, who's a PhD in material sciences and had worked with NASA previously and other companies and doing microtechnology kinds of engineering. Chris came up with the idea of being able to make a capsulotomy without burning tissue, which, as some of your listeners may know, that laser burns tissue, and as well as some of the other devices out there. And I started to work on it, and then over a period of 4 or 5 years, they finally got to a position where they could actually cut a capsule and make it absolutely perfectly round. And at that point in time is when they contacted me. I had been in the ophthalmic field for many, many years. In fact, when I was employed as the Vice President of Operations and Development for Allergan Medical Optics then, we had looked at trying to do something like this, and it was extremely difficult and ended up basically not doing it. And then for 30 years, no one really was capable of coming up with a way how to do a capsulotomy on an automated basis until about 4 or 5 years ago. Femto lasers came out. Obviously, probably a lot of your listeners know, is that the femto market almost exploded, and there was probably over $1.5 billion spent by some of the large strategic companies because they understood the fact that performing a perfectly round, or centered on the capsule at least, was very important, especially for some of the specialty lenses such as multifocal. So that product came out, and it was adopted very quickly by some of the early adopters, and then recently it has slowed down substantially because there's been other issues involved with that. And primarily, it's around the cost. The cost to buy a femto laser is somewhere around $500,000, and the fees to operate them can be very expensive, and $300 to $500, and then you got service costs, and then you usually have to put it in another room and move the patient back and forth, and so here in an area of ophthalmology that we're trying to be more efficient, more effective, here we've come up with a technology that is more costly, and it takes you longer to do it.
Mm-hmm.
And then over the years after the femto was in place, clinical studies were done to try to see, well, was there a significant difference in the clinical aspect, and unfortunately, there really isn't any difference. And in fact, they've had a slightly higher increase in tears and also an increase in the prostaglandin levels because of the amount of heat. And there's been some other things come out, but and it's primarily been centered around the cost, because one thing that is for certain is that performing a nice round centered capsulotomy is important. And so when I looked at the device that both David and Chris brought in, I could see immediately that this had significant potential. Is that I believe this is true because I have asked every physician that what is the hardest thing about doing cataract procedures today? And unanimously, they will all tell you that performing a CCC or circular capsulotomy by hand is difficult. And as a new surgeon, that's usually the last thing that you learn how to do. And unfortunately, not many of them are really consistently good at it, because you have to do a number of cases, and usually if something is going to go wrong with a cataract procedure, it happens at that point in time.
Okay.
So when David and Chris showed me the device, I said, this meets a significant market requirement, something that will give physicians the ability to perform a very round circular capsulotomy and have it be safe. So we started to develop the process to make a capsulotomy consistent and not disrupt the surgical flow. And what we have found is that, number one, when we make a cut, it is a simultaneous cut, meaning that it happens in 360 degrees all around within 4 milliseconds. If you can think about how long does it take for you to blink your eye, it's like 240 milliseconds, but this happens in 4 milliseconds. And the advantages of that is that it allows the capsule bag to have uniform stress when it is cut. Secondly, we have developed the product to be able to go through an incision as small as a 2.2 millimeter incision.
This is in your new version, correct?
Yes, in the new version. And one of the things that we found, which was extraordinary when we went down to El Salvador, and we have now done 20 cases in El Salvador, is that we experienced some small pupils down there, around 4 millimeters. Now, typically when a physician has a patient that has an iris that's that small, pupil that small, what they have to do is either use a iris hooks or a Malyugin ring to open up the pupil to around 6 to 7 millimeters to allow them to then do a capsulotomy and or to finish up with phaco. And typically the data has established that when you have to use hooks or rings, that you have a higher incidence of tear just because of that. And plus the fact it's the additional cost that certainly is not reimbursed for any of those items. It slows down the procedure. It makes it more risky. And what we have found is that with our device, because of the fact that it has a very soft suction cup that lies over the cutting element that's made out of nitinol, it allows us to insert the device underneath a small pupil as small as 4 millimeters and still perform a capsulotomy and save the physician the time and the headaches of trying to use either iris hooks or using a ring to enlarge the pupil. The second thing that we found is that if you have a patient that is a pseudo-exfoliate or a patient that has weak zonule, what you don't want to be doing is to be pressing down or pushing on the capsular bag, because that can obviously tear or rip the zonules. What we have found, and we have done some studies using myopia imaging, in which we have looked at what occurs when you do a CCC to the zonules versus what happens when you use a Zepto. A Zepto basically captures that capsule and firmly holds it into place, while within that 4 milliseconds it makes the cut and does not disturb the zonules at all. So
and the Zepto device being your device.
That's correct. And that's the name of the product is Zepto. I guess I should have probably stated that in the beginning. That name actually came from a series of physicians sitting around the table, and we were trying to think of the kind of name that we would want to have for the product. And as you can imagine, with a number of physicians around the table, we had some pretty sophisticated names coming out there. But what I was looking for was something that people would remember, not only just physicians, but also the general public. Mm-hmm. And of course, Femto was a well-known name now, because lasers, folks have a tendency to think that laser is always better. But as we were sitting around the table, one of our physicians, Dr. Kuldev Singh, who's a practicing physician at Stanford University, he threw the question out. He says, well, what does Femto actually mean? And he went online very quickly and said, well, it's actually a unit of measurement. And he's looking at the various unit of measurements, and he sees Zepto. And he says, well, what about Zepto? And it's one of those things is that when you hear it, you say, that's the right one. And of course, what Zepto really is a unit of measurement that is 1 million times smaller than a Femto measurement. Now, of course, our device isn't 1 million times smaller, but it alludes to the fact that obviously it is smaller and it is easier to handle, and that the Zepto is a disposable device that is used during cataract surgery specifically to create a capsulotomy that basically takes the place of the forceps that are used to try to tear a round 5 millimeter hole in the capsule. They'll take our device instead of the forceps, insert it into the eye, place it onto the capsule, and if they wish, there is another very unique feature that this device can do, which no other device can, and that is center on the visual axis of the patient.
Meaning?
Once you are centered on that visual axis of the patient, it then performs an immediate capsulotomy. And now we think, and there's going to have to obviously be studies that will be done to prove this, but especially on the higher end specialty lenses, it should give a much better result. Certainly, with the nice round capsulotomy, we should eliminate any issues in regards to lens tilt. Mm-hmm. One of the other advantages that the device has is that it doesn't matter what shape the cornea is in. You know, for the laser applications, you have to have a cornea that is scarred, that it doesn't have any scarring or, in fact, any pterygium. And that's one of the other things we did in El Salvador, is that we had a couple of patients with some fairly severe pterygium. Didn't affect us at all. Physician went in, placed a device over the capsule, made a perfect capsulotomy, and was out. So the fact that it doesn't disrupt the surgical flow, and that's what you really want to see in a new device. You don't want to have a device that takes more training, disrupts the operations, or requires that you even have to add people. This one does not do any of that. In fact, it makes a very round, safe capsulotomy. And one of the other benefits that we found that we did not expect to see. What we were expecting to see when we made a capsulotomy is that the actual strength of the capsule, or the capsulotomy itself, the edge of the capsulotomy, would be equivalent to the manual method CCC. Now, we know that with the number of incidences that have happened with laser, that they have some more micro tears, and it's primarily because of the way that the laser cuts. It's like a postage stamp. So we decided to do a 44 cadaver eye study. It was paired cadaver eye study with a 3-arm trial. One would be with the femto, the second one would be with CCC, and the third arm would be with Zepto. And we did this with paired eyes because of the fact that we know that from patient to patient, the tissue changes, and of course, age can have an effect as well. But we wanted to be extremely precise here to be able to know, are we equivalent to CCC? And what we found was astonishing. We were completely surprised. We didn't expect this. What we saw was that the edge strength of our capsulotomies were 2 to 4 times stronger than either a femto or a CCC every time, 100% of the time. Not occasionally, 100% of the time. And then that paper, which was presented by Dr. Vance Thompson and Dr. David Chang into ophthalmology, and was accepted and peer-reviewed and gone on to publication. I believe that was back in January or February of this year. So when you look at our device, here you have a device. If you're going to do cataract procedure, it doesn't matter what kind of comorbidity the patient may have, you can use it.
Okay.
And
so
you would want to use it.
You've got a tremendous technology here. Let's talk a little bit about the market. How large is the market? And your business model going, what hurdles do you have to get through to start selling this into the market? And what does the business look like? Who do you sell it to? Do you sell it through distributors? Can you talk a little bit about that? Get our venture capitalists out there excited.
Yeah, the market, you're looking at the number one surgical procedure that CMS pays for is cataract procedures.
Okay.
Here today in the United States, there are 4 million of them that are done each year. Over in Europe, there's close to 5 million.
And how much would a procedure typically cost in the traditional femto?
Yeah, we are, you mean for a cataract procedure?
Yes.
Cataract procedure in the United States, if you are getting paid for or reimbursed by Medicare, the physician typically gets, depending upon the state, for the actual procedure between $700 and $900 in that range there.
Okay.
If he is performing it, he or she is performing it in an ASC, the ASC then is reimbursed, somewhere between $1,200 and $1,400. If the physician is doing it in a hospital, then the hospital, I believe it's around $1,800, $1,900 of reimbursement for the facility fee. Now, what does that encompass? That encompasses the lens, obviously the procedure time, and any of the equipment or materials that are needed to perform a cataract procedure. So it's all encompassing. And so our device would fall into that application. Now, there is a code it's a code for doing patients that have, small pupils or pseudoexfoliates that allows the physician to get reimbursed about $150 more when you have a patient like that. That's for difficult cases. But that's primarily how the reimbursement is applied here in the United States. Now, over in Europe, it varies from country to country, the kinds of reimbursement. And then, of course, you've got countries outside Europe and the U.S. that probably constitutes about another 60 to 65% of the total market. So, you're talking well in excess of over 20 million procedures a year. Now, of course, this is procedures that are specifically used or phaco is being used. Now, of course, where you do an extra cap where you don't use phaco, this device wouldn't be used, but more and more of the procedures are being done with phacoemulsification and a small capsulotomy. In regards to the approval process, we have received CE mark in late November of last year for our device, and we are now into discussion with the FDA to do a very small clinical trial that hopefully we should start sometime in July and get it recruited fairly quickly. We've been talking to them about a 1-month follow-up, and we expect to have our device onto the market by the end of the third quarter in that time frame. And so we will have a overall market release not only here in the U.S. but around the world in that time frame.
Third quarter 2016.
That's correct.
Excellent. That's moving really quickly.
Yeah, well, we have found that the number of physicians that we have spoken to, and basically every physician sees a place for this device. If you think about a new technology or a new product, is that it's extremely rare to have a product that almost every physician will want to have on his shelf.
Mm-hmm.
There may be some that say, okay, I only want to use this for comorbidities. I may want to use it for patients that I'm doing, the specialty type of procedures for, such as the specialty multifocal lens, or if I may find that I want to use it every time because of the safety aspect here.
Mm-hmm.
But for whatever, position that a physician may take, again, it's very unusual to have a product that every physician would want to have.
And how are you financed currently? I'm assuming there's no revenues being generated from this at this time, but you are financing yourself currently. And what are your plans for financing throughout the rest of 2016, I guess?
Well, we just finished a financing here recently, and
was it a Series
we've
A?
been very fortunate. My focus has been trying to preserve as much as possible the individuals who basically created the product. I think that many of your listeners may know that it's unfortunate in this particular industry is that the innovators or the people who have started a product usually at the end of the day, once a product is successful, which that's a high risk in itself, but once it's successful, the inventors usually get very little. So my focus has been to have a financing and a structure, and more importantly, the structure to allow for us to move very quickly, but at the same time not have a significant amount of financing. And so what we have been able to do here with this company, it was initially started out by internal financing, and then we were fortunate to talk with a strategic earlier on and got a very favorable position on some financing on a convertible note. And since then, we have done other convertible notes with a group. It's the Visionary VC group down in Orange County. And probably the most unique thing that I have found is that almost every one of our employees have put money into the company.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah.
The confidence factor here is extraordinary, but even more importantly than that is that we have 6 very, very prestigious KOLs that we use on our scientific advisory board, and we use them extensively. But they all have invested as well.
Mm-hmm.
And so we have a very prudent financial system here. But I have, when I started, basically, I brought my whole team in the following day. Very unusual. Why is that important? Because, that team is used to working with each other. They come from very successful places prior. They've worked with me for many years. And we do very different things. And what we see is that that group can move very, very quickly and at very low cost. And so that is how we've been able to basically finance this company and basically get it to a final product, manufacturable, ready, with hopefully a 510K and CE mark approval and ready to hit the market in a very short period of time.
John, you've got a tremendous story here. You've got just an absolutely beautiful product that is well reviewed through your peers. You've got a huge market opportunity. I'm certainly looking forward to staying on top of this story and talking to you and providing some of our listeners with more exposure as you develop the company over the next months and quarters.
Well, one of the things that you had asked me previously, and I didn't really focus on this, but was why would a strategic be interested in this?
Mm-hmm.
And if you understand how strategics sell into the cataract market, it basically, they try to capture a market by having their phaco machine and then their packs that are used on the phaco machine and then their OVDs that are used with the cataract surgery and then their lenses. Today, phaco machines from one strategic to the other are very similar. It's very hard to discern one from the other. There isn't a strategic advantage of having one company A over company B. With the Zepto integrated into a phaco machine, now what have you done? You've created a very safe haven. You've created a product that everybody wants to have. You've now started to pull forward not only the Zepto product, but now phaco machines, packs, OVDs, and lenses.
Oh, beautiful. An integrated approach.
So hopefully that answers your question as to why they would be interested.
Yes. John, I'm very excited to stay on top of this. And if any of our listeners are in this area and can help on distribution efforts or reselling or as investors, John is certainly somebody to speak with.
Well, I appreciate the time that you're taking with me this morning here in California. And if you have anyone that would like to contact me, you have my contact information. I'd be more than happy to speak with them.
Yes, we'll be putting that up. Thank you very much, John. We'll speak to you soon.
Thank you.